And that's where I had my near-death experience, falling through the ice when I was 2.5.
Most fear death as a permanent end. Some view death as a new beginning. For these, death is merely a punctuation of life.
I'm Dr. Michael Buchholz. Well, the near-death experience had occurred in Fort Churchill, Manitoba, which is along the rim of Hudson's Bay, and it occurred when I was 2.5 years old. So you can imagine, initially I didn't have much of a memory of it. At the time, my mother had taken my older brother, who's 2 years older, and myself shopping at the United States Commissary, which was a small shopping area that had serviced the American and Canadian military. And it was just in the spring when there was still a lot of snowbanks and sort of frozen puddles, and which was not uncommon. She would have taken us on a toboggan or a sled and would leave the children outside to play, and she would go in and go shopping. And so we ended up finding this nice ice puddle and went sliding, and I had fallen through the ice. And I remember going through and then ending up getting stuck with my arms stuck out and my body falling through and sort of gradually, slowly sinking down into the ice and struggling. And I didn't completely go underwater, but sinking, and getting very, very cold. And then I had seen my brother run off, and remembering, oh my heavens, he's abandoning me. And I just felt so alone and so isolated. And the next thing I remember, which was very peculiar, was that I was actually up in the air. And I remember looking down, and then I could see him actually almost near the entrance of this building. And I could see the roof of the building, and then I could see the siding of the building. And then I could see him entering into the building and other people going into the building. So I would see this from high up in the sky, and I was just amazed at the clarity of the whole vision. And it seemed like forever. And then the other thing that then popped into my mind was, how high was I? And that was just actually a very crazy thought that entered in my mind. And then I realized I could calculate how high I was. And I realized I could calculate the angle, the triangulation of it. And then I recognized that I would have been somewhere in the range of 500 or 650 feet up, calculating the perpendicular and the triangulation. And I thought, wow, that's pretty high. And then I had seen 3 or 4 men come out, and then I could actually watch them come out, and one of them had found this log or a piece of wood, and they had actually crawled out onto the ice. And then I saw how they managed to get that piece of wood over and somehow fish me out of the water. So I had watched that whole process. And then everything went blank, and then I can't remember exactly how they ended up resuscitating me. So the rest of that was blank. But then I remember, after I had been warmed up and come to, and then I was at home, that my mother was very stern and admonished both my brother and I that we were never to tell my father about this event. That this would reflect very badly on all of us, that we were never to speak of this event again. During the time frame of the triangulation, then I went into a period of being taken into another dimension. And that dimension was, I entered into space initially of sort of hovering into a higher sort of cloud where I could see an opening. So it was looking like you would go into the sky, and then the sky had a sort of like a opening of a vortex, and that vortex had a brighter area, a brighter light that opened up into a tunnel-like opening. And then I was drawn into this tunnel that had a defined structure, and then it was like I was drawn into this tunnel, and I don't know how much time it took, but it seemed like just a very brief moment that I traveled up this tunnel of light that had defined walls. And then I exited this tunnel into this poorly defined luminous area. And at the other end of this luminous, ill-defined, cloud-like area were these globular, I would call them, beings. And they were sort of amorphous beings that had just very poorly defined, what I'd call eye-like structures, maybe, that maybe glowed a little bluish. And I would say there were between 8 and maybe 12 of them. And they then surrounded me. And without saying anything, they were able to impart knowledge. They would communicate. And at the same time, there was this enormous sense of peace and tranquility and warmth and compassion. That was an amazing sense of peace that was overwhelmingly comfortable. I mean, it was like coming home 20 times better than when your mother holds you. I mean, it was an amazing sensation. The thing that struck me, that stayed with me, was that there is vibration, that word stuck, and there are particles. So particles and vibration, those two words. So I came away with two words that stayed with me forever. I don't know why. And then the other thing that stuck was, you have to forget. You're not allowed to keep that information. And then they showed me the glory of the universe and the glory of creation. The wonders of it all. And then they also said you have to forget. Now, I didn't see anything about, obviously, I can't say obviously, there's nothing about relatives, there was nothing about a God, there wasn't anything about Christ, there wasn't anything about any other spiritual leader that I remember anything about. I was then taken beyond these folks to a higher level. And I can't exactly say what that was, but it was a brighter level. There was nothing about flowers and trees or pillars or anything else, but it was just more luminescent. And there was a feeling that if I went there, there's not any way of coming back. And then it was imparted to me that I have to go back. And the feeling that I had at that point was that I wasn't good enough to make it. So when I was sent back and entered into my cold body, I was left with that I was not good enough, that I failed the test. Because that was such an incredible experience. And oh, I so wanted to be there. It was so beautiful and so wonderful. And this earth had nothing to compare it to. That there's nothing here that you'd want to stay here for. Honest, it was just so gorgeous. But anyways, here I was, and then I'm told that had I mentioned it, I'd be dead.
By your mother.
By my mother. And anyways, so then I carried on and just basically buried this. Now, having grown up with German parents, I should mention that the way my mother dealt with things and taught me was there are only a certain way you deal with emotions. You don't have emotions, right? You deal with emotions by either projecting them on others or you bury them. And her description of burying them is you take your worst emotions and you put them in a little container and you bury them in the furthest crevice of your brain so they never show up again. And you compartmentalize emotions. So you separate them and you bury them. So there's either projection, denial, and burying. That's it. And you never show them. Best never to have them. And for Germans, the best thing is you are what you do. So if you don't do, you're nothing. So I grew up always having to do. And if you're not doing, you're no good. So you better be busy. Right? So as I was growing up, it was all about having to prove who you are, prove what you have. So essentially you fit into the American dream. Right? So you have to prove the American dream. So then the other issue then having an older brother is that the older brother in the traditional family model gets everything. Younger brother doesn't get anything. Of course, the younger brother doesn't understand that. So then I had to prove that I'm good enough. So then I'm always struggling to prove that I'm good enough. So where that leads me is that in the process of proving to be good enough, I'm trying to overachieve. During my career in my high school and stuff, I overachieved, I did well. Then in my studies, I got scholarships, got into university. Well, I skipped 2 grades, got into university early, got into med school university at 16, med school at 18. Got into the military. I joined the medical officer training plan at 18. I was working in the military, then had a private practice, then worked multiple jobs, did all sorts of extra work. So then I was one of the youngest colonels in the military, overachieved all sorts of stuff. I'm a professor of Dalhousie University. I have the only standalone clinic in Canada. My partner that is in the clinic is the busiest cardiologist and most respected cardiologist in Halifax. We had a house in Halifax, a nice house in the States. My first wife, 5'8", tall, blonde German. model. We had 2 boys. First boy skipped 2 grades. Second boy, very smart, very athletic. So, chief of medicine, professor. I had secretary at Dell. I had a secretary in the military. I had a secretary in Ottawa. I was the advisor to the Surgeon General for research, published papers. I mean, what else do you want? And I was unhappy. Ended up with depression, got suicidal. And it was basically during the treatment of my suicidal depressive, I went to a therapist who recommended Rolfing. I don't know if you know Rolfing, but Rolfing is a technique, a therapy where this person, you're sitting on a chair, and this person holistically goes around you to change your energy. And they're doing deep breathing, and they're moving their hands, and they're moving the energy around you. It sounds weird. They don't touch you, but they're moving these energy fields. It has to do with moving your chakras and stuff, if you understand any of these energy field things. Now, you have to understand me. At that time, I'm fully concrete thinking, right? Medicine's everything, science is everything. This wacky stuff is way out there, so I had absolute no belief in any of this foolishness. But they said I really needed something to change because I was stuck. And pills weren't working. And I wasn't going to have electroshock therapy, which gives you, mental memory changes. So they said I needed to try something different. So I had this social worker who did Rolfing. And I thought this was strange because I'm sitting in this chair and this lady's taking all this deep breathing. And when she's inhaling and moving, she's having all this flatulence, right? I'm a gastroenterologist. And she's inhaling and she's passing all this rectal gas. And I'm thinking, this is the weirdest thing I've ever experienced. You could imagine. And I'm sitting here and I actually peer out of my eye and she's doing this stuff and I'm thinking, oh, this is the weirdest thing. And suddenly I'm feeling like this energy moving through me. And then I feel my spine tingling just in the area that I was stuck in the ice. And it was just this most profound flow and pain. And then she keeps concentrating in this area, and I can't even describe what it felt like. It was just this most intense, like enormous discomfort, and everything's moving, and then suddenly it just kind of releases it. I mean, it was like this enormous electric shock. And then she goes, what? At the same time, she passes this enormous amount of gas. And then she says, I'm done. She passes the flatulence. She says the session is over. Well, that evening, I have the complete recollection of the near-death experience. My dad ended up with heart disease, and I have heart disease. And my dad ended up dying at the age of 60 from coronary artery disease. But he ended up suffering enormously from ischemic cardiomyopathy. But she ended up having him get back to smoking because she couldn't give up smoking. She finally quit smoking at the age of 76 after her triple bypass. When I was 12 years old, was known as Fat Albert.
Fat Albert.
Fat Albert. Okay. And for my birthday, she would give me a bag of Lay's potato chips and my own tub of chip dip, along with a 1 pound bologna to consume by myself. And she then denied when we're living here in Clarksville and she'd come visit. I talked about that because I have 11 coronary stents. And I said, you know, I'm sure that bologna and chip dip didn't help my stents when I was young, or the secondhand smoke, right, that we inhaled for many, many years. Oh, we didn't smoke much. And we didn't have bologna. And I said, well, we had bologna in our spaghetti. We had bologna on my birthday. We had, fried bologna every Friday and blah, blah. No bologna. Right? So I wouldn't have expected that she would ever own up to leaving us alone outside. Now I know that the memory of that building is true from '62 because I found a picture after she had died. She actually had a picture of the commissary. And I'd been back to Fort Churchill, and they had built onto the commissary, and it was a much larger structure. It's now about 3 times as large. So my memory, if this was a, some kind of weird memory, made up memory, would have been of the new commissary. So I have the distinct memory of this very small building with the small imprint in the. So I had everything. Now, of course, my dad had died, so.
Right.
And I never had time to spend with him. Right, so that could be one thing. But why would I be unhappy? Right? I achieved everything.
It's a logical question.
I had everything. But all I was a human doing. All I did was do. I worked. And if you're not doing, I did. You're no good. So once I got open to my near-death experience, what happened was that I had more episodes that I could actually re-enter into the light. So then when I learned how to meditate, I could actually recenter and refocus. And it may sound strange, but if you read the Tibetan Book of the Dead, there are means of going back through the levels and preparing yourself for death. Well, that's actually the same process that you go through of a near-death experience. I had actually met Trungpa Rinpoche, who I don't know if you'd run across, but he's the one who had set up the Shambhala teaching centers in Colorado. In Colorado, he had set up a university, and he had set up the tricycle.
So influential.
He brought the Tibetan teaching over to North America. So, this book right here, The Sacred Path of the Warrior. And also some controversy. So, when I was a resident in 1986, call it fortune or misfortune, he had gone to Halifax from Colorado to set up the center in Halifax. And he ended up ill, and I ended up looking after him in ICU. And so we had a very different kind of relationship. And I must say at that time I wasn't very with it, I'd call it. I wasn't very in tune. I got into medicine in 1976. And back then, we still had doctors that believed in what we call the sixth sense and intuition, and hands-on training, and house calls, and what I would call real medicine. And they believed in diet.
Yes.
They believed in what I would call cosmic consciousness. You could see death. You could feel death. You could smell death. But you could also sense wellness. And you could intuit information from a higher source. And like it says in the Bible, but also in any tradition, whether you're talking Native American or if you're talking Tibetan medicine, there's a knowledge that is cosmic, that is fundamental in the universe. I had professors that somehow recognized, like in the Bible it says you have gifts, right? You can be a healer, you can be a teacher, you can be proselytize, those kind of things. Yeah. You could be an evangelist. Like Christ was one of the ultimate healers, right? He could say to the Roman, your friend or your family is healed. So the point is that during my training, I had many interesting experiences. One where a private patient of that was on in the Victoria General Hospital in Halifax. There was this patient on the 13th floor. They don't have a 13th floor, but it was a 13th floor. Had a myocardial infarct and arrested. I get up there. Right? I finally stagger in because I am on call. And when I enter this room, there's this blue cloud, amorphous blue cloud that looks quite silly to me and has oblong eyes, almost like what I described in my near-death experience, like that amorphous. But these were like light gray clouds. This is a blue cloud, but the same kind of eyeballs hovering at the ceiling. So you can imagine, I'm freaked out. And I think, what the hell is this? So in this room, there's, the patient sink because it's a private room. I go over, splash water in my face, dry myself, pull out the paper towel. It's the old dispenser. Do this. Cloud's still there. What the hell is that? So I move back to the front. And it's like this knowing. And then I suddenly go, it's not your time. I look up at it and says, it's not your time. Get your ass back down here. And I then go over to the staff anesthesiologist. Now you have to picture this. I'm a junior intern. Staff anesthesiologists are gods. They're gods. The only people bigger than staff anesthesiologists are the orthopedic surgeons, right? They are the ultimate gods. I go over to the staff anesthesiologist and I grab the chart and push him out of the way. Push him out of the way. Grab the chart, flip through the order sheet, and realize that he didn't order some medication. And this guy has just announced he's calling the code. He's ending the code. And this guy's going to die. And that's why the cloud's up there. That's his departed spirit leaving. So I call for this medication, 2 stat doses, and then I call for the paddles. And I gave him the first shock of 300 joules. All clear, right? Shock him. Nothing happened. Charge it up. All clear. Second, he's back. Put in the paddles. Sign the orders. Handed back to the nurse. Well, actually back to the staff anesthetist. Just handed right back into his arms and march out of the room. Then I had another strange event where this lady died, had a cardiac arrest on the Sunday in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. Cape Breton is 5.5 hours away by ambulance from our hospital. And I was the cardiology ICU resident on call. And they called up and said, so she had a heart attack on Sunday. The following Sunday, she ruptured her mitral valve. Mitral valve is a valve on the side of your heart, and she ended up having necrosis of her septum. And so her septum is the wall between the two sides of your heart. And so she went into heart failure. And they initially called, and I said, I'm sending the air ambulance. And then they decided they're not going to wait. So they sent her in an ambulance with one nurse. Well, outside of our hospital, she arrested. So for an hour and a half, this one nurse did CPR. So resuscitation for an hour and a half. Well, you can imagine that CPR for 1.5 hours. This is a dead lady. Anyway, so she gets there, and we meet her down at the ambulance bay. And because she did CPR for an hour and a half, we decided we had still run the code. And needless to say, it didn't work. But because we did run the code, I end up writing up all these, handwritten orders forever. Anyways, I'm writing up these orders. And then I get this really cold sensation come over me. And I think, is there some kind of movement? Am I in this room by something else, some strange feeling? And then I look over and we had extubated her and stuff. I think, is that sheet moving? And I look over and then I think, there seems to be maybe some respiration or something. So I go over to her. I think she's breathing. And so then I get out my stethoscope and listen, and yeah, there's some breath sounds, there's a heart sound. And, whoa. So I go out and grab a nurse and say, I think she's alive. Oh, shit. So I hook her EKG back up, and there's electrical stuff, and I grab it. Oh shit, she's alive. Can't believe this. Anyways, the nurse freaks out, I freak out. This is like after an hour and a half. I'm, writing this chart up. I write out the whole history. You know how long that takes in a death certificate. It's the first time I have to, I already sent off the death certificate. Now we have to fish out the death certificate. We send it up the tube system. Now we have to find the death certificate, bring it back. What a piece of administrative hassle. Retract a death certificate. I've never had to do that before. Anyways, so this lady's now alive. And so this was actually just at the change of shift. The nurses didn't want to take her in ICU. And it was just such a pain in the butt. But she's back alive. So anyways, she gets up to ICU. We call cardiovascular surgery. She needs to go to get a new valve. Cardiovascular surgery sees her. I had done a new neurological exam on her. She's dead as a doorknob. She doesn't respond, fixed, dilated pupils. Finally, her family arrives. And they are all crying and lamenting, oh my God, this poor lady. She had written her daughter out of the will. Turns out that she got a lawyer. She was going to change the will, but she never got to sign it. The daughter's still going to be out of the will, and blah, blah, blah. Well, here comes the cardiovascular resident. They're going to wheel her up, all this stuff. Doesn't she suddenly sit up, waves the family over, signs the friggin' will, and then dies. I was seeing this lady that I had 6 years in my practice. And she would come with this gentleman who would bring her to the office. I had no idea who this gentleman was. She never introduced me to this gentleman. But she was always in the room. She would bring this guy, and he was always disheveled and always unkept. But I thought he's some driver. I had no idea who he was. Turns out it was her son. But she would always talk about her other kids, the lawyer in New York and the daughter in Toronto. All successful, all brilliant. And this other one, no idea who he was. And this one day, after I was going to examine her, I walked past and helped her because she was elderly, had a bad hip. I went to help her up, and he was sitting beside her. So when I walked to get her up, I felt this incredible, there's something wrong with him. And I don't know why I felt that. So I got her up, walked into the exam area. And then on the way back, I felt this total unease again. It just hit me in the gut. So anyways, I got behind my desk and explained everything to her. And then this total unease just kept at me. And I just couldn't put it down. I just had to say something. So he just wouldn't let me be. So I told them, I said, listen, I have this impending sense of doom. I said, I know this is odd, and I know this is inappropriate, but I can't help myself. I have to say something. There's something wrong with you, and I don't know who you are, and I don't know what the relationship is, but would you mind if I examine you? I realize if you say no, that's okay. But when I walked by, I just felt something totally wrong with you. And that's when she said, that's my son. My youngest son. So she said, that's okay. So I took him back, and he had a 12-centimeter kidney, which normally your kidney is only 8 centimeters. His left kidney was enlarged. And it turned out to be a hypernephroma. So I sent him for an ultrasound that day. He got operated the next day. And Gerota's fascia is the fascia that surrounds the kidney. And they said that it was just, it was a malignant tumor. So it would have ruptured, and that saved his life. So he came back to see me 2 years later and thanked me, and that changed his entire life. And he came from being under the thumb of mother. And he was an engineer, actually. And ended up being married, and he came to my office and thanked me. I had no idea who he was when he came, because he was all cleaned up and came with his new wife and thanked me for that intervention.
How did the near-death experience and what I presume would be the pieces of the puzzle change the way that you lived your life?
Well, it was a very gradual change, because with the learning that I had through the military, through my upbringing of my home life with my parents, and the training of denial and projection and putting all my emotions in a little box, and having that pounded into me. And then back in the day in medicine, there was no critical incident stress training. I remember the surgeons telling me that emotionally you just suck it up. There is no feeling. You just suck up the pain and deal with it. So to undo all of that process, whether I had a near-death experience or I had all of these other unusual experiences during medicine, or I learned how to intuit from my colleagues who taught me how to feel, what I learned was that I could compartmentalize what I did at work, for instance, where I could take from what I would call a higher realm and apply it in the now, but then I could never apply it in my daily life. So when I was at work with a patient, I could learn to take that, what I would call spiritual energy, and apply it and talk to the patient about it. And counsel them about spirit, but never see myself as a spiritual being. And I had just noticed that there was a Bible over here, and that had reminded me of another incident where I had this wonderful patient and his wife, and they actually gave me this beautiful leather Bible in Halifax with this inscription about learning the passages in the Bible that it might help me. And what they were basically saying is that I had a problem. And they could see it. And I remember telling them, who's the doctor? I'm the doctor. So I was very resistant about looking at myself. And I remember my boss when I was the lieutenant colonel, and he was the colonel. And he told me that I was going to have problems working so hard and that I was going to burn out. And I said, no way, not me. So the thing is that when you're full of ego, you have no insight. And it doesn't matter how many peak experiences you have, right? And all of the masters, all of the gurus will tell you that. I had seen ghosts, clouds, people coming back to life, signing things after death. Had no effect on me because it didn't fit with anything that made sense. So I would just put it in that little box and then, oh, it didn't fit. Obviously, it didn't exist. And I would just pretend it didn't happen. Right? So then I would just go back to my old way of being. Same thing with my near-death experience. But after a while, after I became unhappy, after I had my depression, well, when you're depressed and after you've been suicidal, and I was suicidal on 3 occasions, that becomes a drag, a real big drag. And that's why you need eventually some help. So to answer your question on how did this change is, I was fortunate enough to find a partner, my current wife, who I would call my soulmate, And in this relationship, what I realized is the magic is that we have agreed never to disagree. And the other magic about this relationship is that we've also agreed that when we first got together is that we have this magic of the dance, I would call it. That magic is also that we know it's like coming home, that we're meant to be. It's that powerful. Means you can't be fully ego. So if you're going to be like an egotistical doctor, which the two of us are, to be one together, you have to end up giving up your ego.
Dying to self.
Dying to self, right? But you need your ego to exist, right? So that becomes the ultimate dance, which is dancing between your ego to exist in this world and becoming one, right? And the two of us can work together on a path to figure this out. And we're able to talk about such strange things as consciousness and spirit and soul and not find it weird.
Right.
And so where that has changed is we're able to discuss our limits and our limitations of when we see behaviors, right? So, for instance, it's easier when you have two because I can see her and she can see me, whereas we can't see ourselves. So then when you ask, well, what have I learned, right? Well, I've learned how better to balance. I do meditate. I look at things differently. I pause before I speak. I have looked at a lot of my anger issues, resentments, experiences, become okay with most things. So I'd have to say I probably got okay with 98, 99% of stuff. And then I realized is that I hear in my own head that I have to follow the spiritual path, 100%. What the near-death experience says is that you have to follow the path. You have to follow the path of love. And the path of love, like this book from the Panorama of Existence by Robert W. Musgrave. He finally wrote his book. Robert W. Musgrave was 2 years behind me at Halifax West High School. He finally said the same thing. He had to write the book about his near-death experience. And he felt obligated to share what made him change and what his near-death experience changed his behavior and what he learned from it and what his messages were and what it told him about life and stuff. What I can say now is that I have to continue to follow the practice of loving kindness and living more in love with whatever that takes. There is a divine spark in all of us. Find that light.
What's your one sentence to give someone hope?
One sentence that would give someone hope. Shoot. Hoy. There is a divine spark in all of us. Find that light.